It has been a very busy past couple of weeks for the tabletop community at large. Specifically because of all the fallout regarding Wizards of the Coast. Wizards have been actually making a lot of kind of poor decisions in regards to their handling of Dungeons and Dragons. Some of their books they've been putting out sort of recently have been leaving people wanting for content that they were expecting to get, and some other instances of things in their books or things that the company has just done outside of their books have stirred up some controversies, such as the insensitive racial similarities with the Hadozi art that was in Spelljammer, and some of the just direct actions made by the company towards some of their employees. Wizards has been kind of a trash fire, and a lot of people have been trying to get away from that ecosystem. This was heavily spurred on in recent weeks by all of this open gaming license debacle of Wizards trying to basically shut out third parties from being able to do anything reasonable as far as making their livelihoods off of publishing third-party content. Thankfully, the fan backlash has worked rather well. There was a major boycott or dropping of D&D Beyond subscriptions. Paizo recently announced their involvement with the open role-playing creative license, or the ORC, which is, there's been some memes circulating around with that. People like the name, and it does seem to be a promising omen for the future of the hobby. What I'm here to talk about today, though, is mentioning Paizo. A lot of people, in the wake of all this, have been looking for a life-raft system. They played 5e, maybe they only played 5e, but they don't want to be supporting Wizards of the Coast anymore, and they want something more than just not buying any new books. They want to completely move systems. For those people, there are a lot of systems out there. There are systems that cover the same type of fantasy that D&D sort of does. There are systems that cover completely different types of fantasy. There are things that aren't even fantasy. You got sci-fi stuff all over the place as well. But I'm not as well versed in those. What I do know, to a degree, is Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Pathfinder 2nd Edition has been a really common name that gets tossed around as far as systems to move to from 5e. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Pathfinder 2nd has to offer. And I'm not trying to sell anyone on the system. I like it. But what I am trying to do is give you a clearer idea. Is this the system for you? Is this the life raft that you and your players want to jump to? Because it might not be. It's like Pathfinder 2nd. I like the system. It is not going to be to everyone's tastes, and that's perfectly fine. But something like this might give some of you who have only played 5e a better idea of whether or not Pathfinder 2nd sounds like something you want to check out, whether your players want to check out. So let's start off with establishing a bit of a tone. Pathfinder 2nd's tone. In the core book, it is advised to stay kind of a light to medium tone as far as like how dark things get. PG-13 is what I would describe it as, very much so. The book does kind of say maybe try and avoid describing certain acts of violence in too gruesome a detail. The book actually outright puts down a list of things that like players probably shouldn't be doing, even if they're playing like an evil character. Obviously, these are not hard rules. the way that other aspects of the game are. You could decide, no, you want your evil characters to be able to do certain things. But in general, the game is expecting a PG-13 tone where even if you are playing an evil character who is kind of a villain, you are not a monster. So, if you are looking for something that's really dark, really grim, this might not be it. I mean, you could use it for that, but this is not what this is built for. You might be more interested in looking at something like Shadow of the Demon Lord. That is plenty useful if you want dark and more more gruesome stuff. If that's what you want, that might be more up your alley. Pathfinder 2nd can be used for that, but they recommend more of a PG-13 tone. The other thing is that where D&D has a lot of different settings. D&D has Forgotten Realms, and Eberron, and Ravenloft, and Spelljammer, and Dragonlance. Pathfinder doesn't do that. Pathfinder has one big setting called Galarian. It's one big planet, it's got lots of continents on it, and honestly, regions on those various continents are big enough where they basically are those types of settings that you might want. You have plenty of room to put various things. You play different types of games. Galarian has room for it. Some of the places in Galarian are more inspired by parts of our real world. The nation of Taldor has some aspects of it that are reminiscent of the Byzantine Empire, such as the ruler, the Grand Prince, having a bodyguard troop made up of members of the basically fantasy Scandinavia part of Galarian, which is kind of a reference to the Varangian Guard. And then you have places like Garund and Kazmaran and Tian Sha, which are whole continents that are very clearly drawing some inspirations from real world places. Garund is mostly drawing on parts of Africa, including having an Egypt-like nation up in the north. Kazmaran is mostly based on parts of Western and like Southern Asia. So you got Persia stuff in there. You got some stuff from like India mixed in there. Tian Sha it's East Asia. It's got analogs to fantasy China, fantasy Japan. You got some fantasy Mongols in there up in the north. They have a whole separate group of dragons that are basically only found there, as far as I'm aware, that are more inspired by the Eastern dragon compared to the Western dragons. So you have these places. Or the Land of the Linorn Kings, which is that fantasy Scandinavia place I mentioned earlier. So you have these places in Galarian that are inspired by parts of our world, of course. But Galarian really engages with the fantasy kitchen sink archetype in a way that I don't really feel like many D&D settings really leaned into. Because while it does have that stuff, it also has plenty of things that are just completely bonkers, not connected to any real world place. It's completely fantasy. And some of these places are like, they're completely fantasy, but they're kind of basic. And some of these stuff is weird. You have the Impossible Lands, which are two nations, each run by a very powerful wizard. And there is a no man's land called the Mana Wastes between these two nations that was caused by those two wizards going to war. Then you have Numeria, which is where a spaceship with very futuristic technology crash landed on Galarian, and now the local peoples occasionally harvest these like really rare metals that came off of the spaceship, and there are these sort of foundries scattered around the region that will occasionally give birth to androids. Just straight up androids. They're playable. Like they're in one of the books. You can play them. It's interesting. Not all of Galarian keeps to just being standard fantasy. Some of it has a little bit of that sci-fi stuff in there, but it all works because Galarian's big. You don't need to interact with all of it at one time, and that's how they kind of get away with different parts of the setting being that's how they get away with different parts of the setting basically being their own campaign setting without needing to make completely different worlds every time you want something kind of new. And then it also kind of helps avoid any sense of Planet of Hats, where it's like, yes, this is the Grimdark planet. Yes, this is the swashbuckling planet. No, you don't need that. You don't need that. So, touched on tone, touched on some aspects of just the setting in general. On the more mechanical side, if you're coming from 5e and you're wondering whether or not Pathfinder 2nd might be for you, Pathfinder 2nd is, without a doubt, this is a crunchier system. There's a lot more numbers, there's a lot more choices that players gotta make. The core rulebook is big. Thing's a brick. It's not a small book. You pay and you get a lot for it. Like you get your money's worth with that book. Some people don't like the crunchy systems. They don't like these systems where there's a lot of numbers, a lot of things to keep track of. And if that's you, cool. Pathfinder 2nd might not be the system for you. Something like 13th Age is similar type of fantasy as like D&D and Pathfinder, but it is way more focused on roleplay and less on numbers. I believe a system like Fate or Savage Worlds are also kind of more in those, but don't quote me on those. 13th Age is the one I know is a bit more solidly in that realm. So, yeah, if you played 5e and you didn't like getting into combat, if you were perfectly fine just role-playing most every session, and you really didn't care for combat, you didn't care about the combat abilities, Pathfinder 2nd is probably just going to lose you, because it's a lot about combat. It's not a war game, this isn't Warhammer, but while Pathfinder 2nd does have aspects for exploration, and it has aspects for role-playing to make that like really integral and part of the game and fun, those aspects work best when they're used as supporting pillars to the combat. The combat, you use the exploration to get from one big combat to another big combat. You use the roleplay to give you a reason to want to get into a combat in the first place. It is not combat-centric. It's not the only thing, but it is a big thing. It's a big pillar. And Pathfinder takes care of all of its pillars pretty well, which I don't feel that 5e did. But combat is still a big one, and if you are looking for a system that makes exploration or role-playing the big tentpole, this might not be what you're looking for. Now, if you are maybe looking for something a little bit more crunchy, or at least if you're open to something that's a bit more crunchy, some of the more prominent mechanical differences between the systems are, if you are a GM, the system's going to treat you right. If you are someone who ran 5e, and the monster experience budget always just drove you up the wall. You were always frustrated with how difficult it was to make an encounter that didn't either kill your party or was a cakewalk. Pathfinder 2nd has an encounter planning system that actually freaking works. It's really nice. It's nice to have a system that doesn't just leave a GM hanging, kind of expecting us to do all the work. And that is the big thing, is that Pathfinder 2nd does a lot to make the GM's job a lot easier than it was in something like 5th edition, or honestly, even some other versions of D&D. Because you have the encounter budget just working like it should, and there's also the fact that there's a lot less that's left up to a gray area of, oh, let your GM make a call. Most everything has laid out rules of, like, yes, this is how this works. The GM making a call is less about there is no ruling for this, and it's more about, do you have time to find it? You know, the GM just needs to make a call so the game keeps moving, but you should still be trying to memorize, but, like, you should still be trying to learn the books, learn the rules so you're making the right call, even if you can't get to that page fast enough to have play not get slowed down. And that's where that thing is. There are rules for most everything where the GM is not fumbling around in the dark trying to figure out, oh, what am I supposed to do? It's just that sometimes it takes a while to get to the rules, and in that instance, maybe the GM makes a call. Maybe it isn't exactly what the rules say, but keeping play going, that's the important part. And then you can, try and learn that particular rule better for next time. So some of the other aspects of Pathfinder 2nd, as far as the rules, the mechanics go. Some similarities, because I'm talking a lot about the differences. Pathfinder 2nd does have a lot of similarities to D&D. Pathfinder 1st edition was basically a cleaned up version of D&D 3.5. So it has its roots in that D&D ecosystem. Pathfinder still uses the standard group of dice. D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20. Those are still the dice you're using. It's not a dice pool system. It's not a percentile system. It's not a D6 system. It uses that standard D&D array of dice in mostly the same context you would expect it to be used in D&D. The big 6 ability scores: Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Wisdom, Intelligence, Charisma. Same ones. We use them, you use them, we both use them. Most of the core rulebook classes and ancestries they should look very familiar. A few names are different. Paladins are not the name of that class. The holy warrior archetype that Pathfinder uses is called the champion. Champions kind of have like a sort of like a subclass that is based on their alignment. The lawful good champion is called a paladin, but the neutral good champions are called redeemers. Chaotic good champions are called liberators, and then you have evil ones as well that were added in one of the other books. Lawful evil, I believe, is a tyrant. I think neutral evil is a desecrator, and I believe chaotic evil is anti-paladin. Yeah. So you have those options. Those options are there. They should feel familiar. You should be right at home. Humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, all of those that you know from D&D are present. Some that you might be a little thrown off by. The core rulebook has a class called Alchemist. Alchemist it's kind of a crafting-centric class. It's not exactly like D&D's Artificer. It and Inventor both fill that kind of role that Artificer tried to. But Alchemist it's in the core rulebook. I would maybe recommend not starting with that. You know, if you're new to Pathfinder 2nd and your group is making characters for the first time, I would maybe recommend getting to know some aspects of the system first with some simpler classes before you try Alchemist. Just because Alchemists have a lot of little gadgets and things that they make, and that can be a little daunting to keep track of when you're just starting out. Some other things is that goblins are in the core rulebook as an ancestry you can play. They're there. It's cool. Some of the iconics, the classes that are like represented in the book, the art of that class, it's called the iconic. Some of the iconics are goblins, and people have a lot of fun with those. I'm not going to go into too many of the ancestries that are in other books, just because Pathfinder has a lot of them. Pathfinder has a lot of books right now, so there are a lot to choose from. But there's plenty of options that you are probably going to be familiar with from what you're used to. Orcs are in one of the other books, as are things like Azarketi, which are the name obviously doesn't sound familiar, but they're basically kind of like Tritons. They are semi-aquatic humans or human-like beings. But then another difference is that Pathfinder uses what's called versatile heritages. So if you play an elf, you have a choice of elf heritages. Of what kind of elf are you, where are you from, and that might give you some differences of like what bonuses you get or what abilities you get. But there are also versatile heritages that can apply to any ancestry. These are where things like Tiefling and Aasimar come in. Because Pathfinder has a lot of feats. D&D 5 really didn't do much with feats in its game. Pathfinder does. You have some general feats, but you also have a lot of class feats, and you have a lot of skill feats. And class feats help you do different, better things with your class. It's kind of like buying your class features and picking the ones you want. Skill feats are making your skills better, getting more uses out of certain skills. Ancestries also have feats, so you can use if you're playing a dwarf, you can use your dwarf feats to become a kind of more dwarfy dwarf. Something where you are really leaning into an aspect of your heritage and who you are as a person. And in this sense, versatile heritages, they don't give you many just like straight numbers things. They don't tend to give you any ability boosts like your ancestry does. What they do give you is versatile heritages give you access to another list of ancestry feats that you can pick from. So if I'm playing an elf tiefling, when I get an ancestry feat from leveling up, I can pick to either spend that on an elf feat, or I can spend that on a tiefling feat. And that can lead to some very interesting ways that your character can evolve and do different things. There are some really fun ancestry feats out there. Some of my favorites are kobolds get ancestry feats just from being kobolds that allow them to sprout wings or get a little breath weapon. And so you can, if you take the right feats with a kobold, you can kind of become a little dragon person. But yes, versatile heritages are a thing, and they're very useful and they're very fun because it means that you can have a human who is an Aasimar, and you can have a dwarf who's an Aasimar, and you can have an elf who is an Aasimar, and those are all going to play differently. They're not all going to be this very same, they all use the Aasimar, they just look different thing. No, they're going to play different, and those abilities are going to work together differently because you're combining these Azamar feats that you might be taking with the base ancestry feats. A couple other versatile heritages besides Tiefling and Azamar. Pathfinder has its own equivalents to Genasi, as far as people who have some sort of bloodline connection to genies. Sylph, Undine, and I believe the Fire and Earth ones are not coming to mind right now, but Sylph, for example, is the air option, and Undine is the water option. So those are all versatile heritages as well. Beastkin and Dampier are also in that list. So if you want to play someone who can kind of be sort of like a werewolf, you transform into an animal form, whatever, Beastkin's your option. You'll want to play a vampire light, Vampire is right there. And again, those are things that are applied on top of your basic ancestry. And so there's that. Beyond ancestries and versatile heritages, Pathfinder 2nd doesn't use multi-classing. Pathfinder 2nd has what are known as archetypes. Archetypes are... It's like multi-classing, but softer. Basically, you can... When you get a class feat by leveling up, you can either spend that class feat on a class feat up from whatever it is you have, or you can spend that class feat to dip into an archetype. There are archetypes for all of the classes that exist, and this is how you do multi-classing. You take a class feat for a class archetype, and it gives you access to some abilities, some features that you can use class feats on to make you gain some stuff from that class's ability pool, but you're not making a full, I am half this and I am half this with my classes. There are archetypes, though, that are completely not related to your class. Some of these do still use class feats. Some of these use a mix of class feats and skill feats. All of them require at least one class feat to dip into it. But then some will use skill feats for most of the abilities. Usually there's like one class feat ability in there, though. So, for example, you could be playing whatever class, and you could use an archetype or you could take the archetype to become a vigilante, which gives you some cool things where you have this alter ego where you have two different alignments, one for your social personality that everyone kind of sees, and one for your vigilante personality. And yes, I can already hear you typing. That means you can use that where if you want to play a character who has sort of the superhero thing going on, where when you're working with your party and you're off doing adventures, you're kind of in like superhero mode, but then you have a different persona when you are around regular society. Yeah, that can work. An investigator who dips into the vigilante archetype is basically Batman. Like that's an option. If you want to play a character who has that kind of vibe, there you go. That's an option for you. But archetypes are what we have instead of multi-classing. It makes it so you don't have quite as overpowered dips into things of really going crazy with combining these two classes' abilities into one big thing. It makes it a bit more manageable. Some people who really like to munchkin those combos might not be happy, but for the people who complain about balance, that's a thing for you. Pathfinder also has a 3-action economy, so rather than action, move, bonus action, reaction, you just have 3 actions. Strike is 1 action, stride is 1 action, and stride is just moving your movement speed. So you could stride twice and then attack. You could stride once, attack twice. Most things are not built for attacking a lot, like attacking 3 times with just one turn is not generally suggested as a thing you should be doing. Using all 3 of your actions to attack. But you also have some things where some special abilities use up more than one action, and then you might be using multiple actions to attack. Some spells gain better effects. They do different things if you use multiple actions. So the basic heal spell, I believe if you use 2 actions, it gains a range, so you can heal people who are further away rather than just people who are right close to you. If you use all 3 actions to cast it, it becomes an area of effect, so you can heal all of your allies within a certain distance of you. So that's nice. But that's a change. If that sounds like, oh, hey, that change sounds really cool, I'd like to try that out. Cool. If not, then that's not how that works. Creature XP for GMs. It's sane, basically. Creature XP doesn't make you want to tear your hair out. Players just need 1,000 experience to level up, and all creatures have a level, and there is a chart that tells you, based on the level of the party and the level of the monster, how much experience that monster is worth. So they still just need to get 1,000 experience every time, but the value of experience for the monsters will change. Weaker monsters will be worth less and less experience as the party gets stronger. And simultaneously, monsters are a bit above the party's pay grade will be worth a lot of experience. So there's a balancing system, and that's also kind of how we figure out encounters. And it is so much better. It is. I took one look at it, and I'm like, oh, playing using experience instead of milestone doesn't have to suck anymore. So if you are someone who wants to play using experience for the progression of your players, this is a good thing for you. Some of the last couple of things, because I think I've covered most of the big differences without doing a crazy deep dive of the system. Pathfinder, like, obviously you can buy the books, you can buy PDFs that, like, you have, no D&D Beyond bullshit. What it does have, though, is you can access most of the rules for free. The Archives of Nethys is a website that you can access basically all of the rules for free. All the mechanics sides, how the monsters work, how the class features work, any of the optional rules or the rules for GMing, those are all on the Archives of Nethys, which is a fan-run but Paizo-approved website. And yeah, on the Archives, you just have all the rules for free. It doesn't have all the art that the books do, and the lore stuff that you find in the Lost Omens books, which are the setting books, that stuff isn't on the Archives, but all the mechanical stuff is there. So if you're just trying to learn the system, that's great for you. Pathfinder 2nd Edition Tools is another website. It's shortened to PF2e Tools. It's another website. It's similarly about giving you access to all of that stuff that's on the Archives. It's just sort of if you prefer the archive way of organizing it, or if you prefer the PF2e Tools way of organizing it, that's really the big difference there. The other big thing is Path Builder. If you're looking at all these numbers, and maybe you're used to a D&D Beyond character sheet, and you wish you had something like that can just kind of help you get it out of the way, Path Builder 2nd Edition is a great tool to just help you punch in what your class is, what your level is, what your background is, and it kind of fills in some of the numbers for you. and it's really useful if you're just trying to figure some things out and you're worried about forgetting something. So, I think for now, those are most of the major features. I thought this video was not going to be as long as it is, but looking down in the corner, it went 35 minutes anyway. So that was not intended, but oh well. Yeah, this is most of the major differences between the systems I can think of without going super deep. So I hope this video was useful. I hope that if you were on the fence, you know where you are now. Whether this is a life-raft system for you, or whether you might want to go check out something like 13th Age or Shadow of the Demon Lord. Anyways, I guess I will maybe talk to some of you later. And I think I'm done here. Alright. Have a good day, everyone.